if you're going into camping ministry because you want a lot of teenage friends, that's not going to be your outcome.
To say something like, you know, God cares about each person. God cares that our church, our trip, anything is it is a place where there is safety and there is respect. That's how we love our neighbor as ourselves. All of us contribute to that. And we as your leaders care very deeply that this is a place of safety and respect. We care about each person.
For you are all.
Another thing is to be the parent asking the questions. When a community has done the work, they love to show the work. You know, it's like, oh, thank goodness someone's asking me. To say something as simple as, can you tell me what your camp does for training and screening? And then to have an open-ended question after that, you know, can you tell me what your camp does about when it comes to child protection, because that's so important to me. And to just hear, and again, when a community has done the work, they love to show it, and it can help you with making decisions.
It's your hand if I don't. In each hour of unrest, when it seems I've not.
And welcome to a Grace Live conversation. Today's topic that we'll be covering is summer trip safety. Last month, if you remember, our focus was action in the absence of justice. And that program can now be viewed on our YouTube page. So please feel free to go over and check that out. Action in the absence of justice. And you can find that on our YouTube page, along with other Grace Live conversations that have occurred in the past. My name is Pete Singer. I'm the executive director here at Grace. Grace was established in 2004 by a person by the name of Boz Chividjian. And Boz was a child abuse prosecutor, and what he noticed was that in many situations where abuse intersected a faith community, the faith community would show up in support of the alleged perpetrator rather than the alleged victim. And he knew that that did not represent the heart of Christ. And so he started Grace back in 2004. And then in 2020, I started ramping up and became the executive director in 2021. Please remember that there will be a Q&A at the end of our time together today. So probably at about a quarter till is when we'll switch over to questions and answers. If you could please use the Q&A field at the bottom of your screen to place any questions that you may have that you would like Mike and Alison to address later, that would be great. If you have a question and we're not able to get to your question, please email your questions to info@netgrace.org. That's info@netgrace.org for questions that we were not able to get to during our time today. Well, we are definitely blessed to have two very knowledgeable, very skilled, very wise people when it comes to summer trip safety. Today, joining us are Alison Feigh from the Jacob Wardling Resource Center, a project of the Zero Abuse Project, and Mike Sloan, who's the Director of Safeguarding here at Grace. Alison, could you introduce yourself? And then Mike, you also.
Hi, thanks. My name is Alison. I serve, as it was said, as the director of the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center under the Zero Abuse Project. I also am very invested in camps and camp life and faith community. I was blessed to be a camp chaplain for 20 years, and I did full-time youth ministry for 7. And I've just seen all the positive things that camp can bring, but I've been a sexual assault advocate as well for over 25 years. And we also know that camps can be a place that are targeted by people with bad intentions. So I always want to do what I can to equip folks to do the best kind of ministry possible.
Hi, everyone. As Pete said, I'm Mike Sloan, and I'm glad to be with you today. So I'm the director of safeguarding at Grace, and Have filled this role for several years now, but before this role, I served as a pastor in 2 different churches. And among my responsibilities as a pastor was planning trips with students and overseeing those trips. So thought about these issues a lot, and of course, personally been a part of trips like that. And then, of course, I'm a parent myself. And so, as a parent, I'm very personally invested when my own children have and in the future are going on trips. So, and because of my role at Grace, of course, I've been able to consult with many churches alongside our team here when churches are thinking about very critical issues about safety in leading students and kids on trips. So glad to be with you today and talk through some of these issues together.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. And today we're going to be looking at just a lot of advice, a lot of pointers for making sure that we're doing all that we can to safeguard these summer trips, whether they be a camping trip, whether they be a short-term missions trip or some other form of trip, to safeguard the trip and the people that are coming on the trip. We're going to look at wisdom for church leaders, those who are planning, those who are volunteering, those who are supervising and safeguarding our youth on these trips. So we'll look at wisdom for those who are leading the trips, those who are leaders in the faith community as they oversee the trip. We're also going to be looking at wisdom for parents who are sending their kids on a summer trip. That's placing a lot of trust in an organization. So what can you do as a parent to oversee that and assure that that trust is well earned? Alison, I know you mentioned briefly in your introduction, as we look at this wisdom, you see some both unique advantages and unique risks that could come up with summer trips. Can you fill us in a little bit on some of those unique advantages that make summer trips so powerful, and then also some of the unique risks that might come with them?
I think it's the both and of a summer trip can be life-changing. The question is, in which direction is it going to be life-changing? I've witnessed kids just make such wonderful strides in their peer connections, in their faith life, in their ability to try new things and to feel really successful when they've been away from home in a new environment with supportive staff. I've seen wonderful mentor-mentee relationships form. So there's that wonderful experience. Then you also have experiences where people are mistreated, whether they're bullied by other kids in their cabin, whether someone in authority hasn't thought through safety planning and they're trying to do things, by the seat of their pants, which is never good for anybody. And so just that idea, and having done youth ministry and doing camp, the worst nights of sleep of my life. I brought a group of 20 kids to New York City for a week with wonderful chaperones, which again, if you're a parent and you can chaperone, that's a wonderful asset for a variety of reasons. But I had the worst night's sleep of my life, imagining kids getting lost on subways, imagining all these, and I had done all the pre-work, but it's still, you feel the pressure, you feel that happening on your shoulders. So the more that we can do ahead of time so that we screen and train good people, that the people who have been screened and trained know what's expected of them, that there's really, that people are put in areas where they're skilled and not being pushed to as adults to do things that they're not good at. Like maybe someone isn't good at relational ministry, but they're really good at helping with meals, and doing some real gifts inventory and those kinds of things. But I guess my biggest piece is that these can be really wonderful adventures for young people and within their communities. But it's really important that we do the work first, because anytime a safety thing comes up and there hasn't been, like even just something like a thunderstorm, and we haven't made a plan of how we get the kids from where they are back safely to their cabins, we're trying to make it up on the spot, that those kinds of experiences can be really hard for everybody, for the staff, for the leaders, for the kids. And so the more that we can invest in having plans, having policies, doing that practice, doing good training, the better off everybody is.
Yeah, there's so much that's unique to those summer trips that doesn't come up in a lot of other activities for youth groups or for kids. So yeah, definitely need to take into account all that could happen. Mike, you consult with a lot of churches. You have guided many through various issues of safety, and sometimes that issue of safety is around summer trips. Can you maybe share with us some of the wisdom that you've shared with faith leaders, with other people who are planning a summer trip, what they need to do, what they need to be thinking about in regards to safety and safeguarding?
Yeah, thanks. Of course. I mean, first of all, I really just want to say what Allison was getting at is so important, that we think about the policies that we're utilizing in our ministry already, good screening practices and things like that, and make sure that we're continuing to apply those when we think about a trip. You know, we want the leaders, the volunteers who are on the trip to have been, very well screened according to best practices. Um, Certainly, by the way, if you don't know what that might look like or mean, if you want to get our book, the Child Safeguarding Policy Guide, this is a wonderful published resource um, from our ministry that goes into that in detail. Um, and the thing with trips, and also kind of what Allison was getting at, I mean, there's a lot of unique risks. There's often more opportunities for isolation, which many bad actors are very interested in getting kids into a more isolated setting. There are just things about a trip that are challenges for safety that you're not dealing with in a weekly meeting at the church, right? You're changing and showering, you're sleeping together. Groups of the people, kids of the group are sleeping, and you have to do arrangements for sleeping. Those types of challenges, and sometimes you have activities like swimming where there's more vulnerability and risks with changing into swimming gear and all this stuff. So, the key and the most important practical thing I would tell leaders as you think about a trip. So I guess I already said the first thing, but I would say the next most important, the first thing is we're approaching this in a very deliberate, careful manner, like we do all of our ministry with minors. So we're applying our policies that we've invested in, that we've worked hard in to get up to best practices. But on the trip specifically, the most important thing to say is that we plan ahead, that we know what is the setup. What are the sleeping arrangements? Are all the boys in one big room, and all the girls are in one big room? Or is it more we have to use hotels? And then we have to think through that from a standpoint of safety. So we have to know what the accommodations are. So that means if I'm leading a trip to do it responsibly, I might have to call them, or if I already know kind of the setup, great. But any questions I need to resolve, what are the setups of the rooms? How, what restroom and shower setup do we have? We need to know that so we can plan. And those are often the higher risk type areas, the sleeping arrangements, the showering and changing, how is that done? Because we need to ensure, there's not adults and kids, in a state of undress, with each other. That should be private. How are the restrooms? Are they connected to the sleeping area? Is it single use? Is it, one restroom for everyone? So you have adults and kids using them at the same time. We need to know those things. And then with that knowledge, we can make a plan that brings clear boundaries, clear expectations to what is expected for the adults, what is expected for the students. And so that's where it starts. We'll come back to the specifics and some things, that might be helpful later in our conversation. But then the other really critical thing I would say to any leader is you must set a priority, that our priority on this trip is safety. And so I would encourage any leader to set that priority by giving a talk about safety and covering the specific expectations before the trip. Part of how, prevention works is by clarifying what's expected, and I would say in a Christian setting, by connecting this to our faith community's values, God's priorities and values, we're going to do so much for prevention. First of all, by deterring, testing of boundaries, or even beyond that, abusive behavior. But we're also going to set up our ability to bring accountability if those boundaries are tested. And that's also how a lot of prevention actually works. So in a talk, and I apologize, Pete, I'm going on a bit here. I'll just wrap it up really quick. As a leader, we need to give a talk and say, here is our heart and our priority in this. Here are the specific expectations. And I would encourage the talk to be with the parents, with the kids, the students themselves, and with the volunteers or any leaders, because that does so much for you. The kids know you've told the expectations to the adults. That gives them empowerment if there is a concern to speak up, because they know the adult knows better. And the same with their peers. If their peers are interacting with them in a concerning way, they know the peers were there and heard what is expected. And that also gives empowerment so the students are empowered, the parents are empowered to ask further questions, and the parents know part of their role can be as an outlet, as a trusted person to speak up to if their kid needs to. So that really helps all of us set that cultural expectation of our priority, what's expected specifically, and the empowerment to speak up so we can bring accountability if that is needed. So as a leader and as someone who's led those trips and given those safety talks, I think it really makes a difference and sets an incredible tone to deter and to, put us in a really good position to reinforce, if needed, accountability. So again, sorry for the long answer, Pete, but I get really
No
passionate
problem.
about that.
Yeah,
And I would
really
just
good
add one
information.
small thing to that before we move on, is that when you're working with junior high and high school youth, or youth of any age, having them, are there any rules that you all think we should live by as a group that we should really put up there so that they've helped write the rules and they have the buy-in? It's easier when they know the why, and when their peers are saying, well, let's make sure that the language we use is language that makes people feel safe, not using things that are sexist, racist. Like when they're creating those rules, then
Yeah,
they have more buy-in. So if you create opportunities for that, that can add to
yeah,
that community cohesion and a chance for newer people in the group to see what this community values.
yeah, love that.
Those are good points. Good points. Well, Allison, we've just talked about some advice for leaders as they prepare to take a summer trip with a group of youth. What advice would you give to parents? What wisdom would you share with parents for how they can play an active role in safeguarding for their child's summer trip?
There's so many different things a parent can do, and some of it is making sure that the community that they're doing this trip with, that they're engaged in, is a community that you have investment in, that you sort of, this isn't a mountaintop once in a lifetime experience where you haven't met these people, you haven't connected with these people, but this is an ongoing group or community that is offering this thing. Whenever possible, that's better, because then you have those relationships. It's not always a possibility, but that's one proactive thing. Another thing is to be the parent asking the questions. When a community has done the work, they love to show the work. It's like, oh, thank goodness someone's asking me to say something as simple as, can you tell me what your camp does for training and screening? And then to have an open-ended question after that, can you tell me what your camp does about when it comes to child protection, because that's so important to me. And to just hear, and again, when a community has done the work, they love to show it, and it can help you with making decisions. I remember when my daughter was in infancy and I was trying to figure out which gym to join. I mean, which feels like a very, just like a normal thing to do, and reaching out to the two gyms that I was looking at and saying to one, like, can you send me your child protection policies, because I'm considering joining your gym, and asking that of the other gym. And the first gym just sent me a paragraph about, if your child soils their diaper, they'll page you. And that was it. Like, that was the extent of it. The other one, it was 4 pages. It was screen. It was like, choose your own venture. Guess which gym I joined? Like that one, So the people who've done the work, you're not going out to get them. It can be really collaborative and positive. One of my child wanted to study violin, and I reached out and I said, hey, my kid was interested in violin. Can you tell me what you have and the amount, yep, these are our policies. This is what we do for training. We want parents in the room with them until they're 10, and here's why. And it was there, and it was the sense of no one ever asked me, so thank you for asking. And so I think sometimes as parents, we're worried to be the one to stir the pot or ask questions. But if the group has done the work, that's an exciting thing for them to share with you. And if they haven't, that's a challenge. My child was interested in doing a theater day camp, and I reached out and I said, hey, I'm looking on your website. I see a lot of policies about things. I don't see anything for child abuse. Can you just tell me what you do about that? And they said, we actually don't have anything, but if you check back with us in 2 weeks, we will. And then in 2 weeks later, they sent me what they had worked on. They had stuff on their website. Like it can be a really collaborative thing. So for parents not to look at it as you're trying to get this in trouble or you're trying to be that parent, because I think a lot of us don't ask the questions. We don't want to be flagged as problematic or whatever else, but to know that us asking those questions gives the people a chance to share stuff that they've worked on, that they're invested in. If they haven't done that work, it's a good challenge for them to do that, or to not have your kid be on a trip with people who haven't done the work. And then talking to your kids ahead of time about safety, doing some what ifs. In our family, and because of my line of work, we might take things 5 steps further, but we have a family code where if I call to check in and she uses the code word, it means I'm in over my head, come get me, so that she doesn't have to say like, this place feels unsafe. We had a family code word when I was a kid. I used it once. I was like 16. I was doing childcare for a family and they came home intoxicated and I didn't want to get in their car, but I didn't want to tell adults as a 16-year-old, like, no. So I called my dad and used that and he came to pick me up for babysitting. So just sort of having some of those things in place as a chance of communication, things as simple as sending a care package, writing, so that they feel connected. And then let them know that they deserve to be treated with respect and that they deserve to treat other people with respect. I will never drop my child off somewhere and say, now listen to all the adults, do everything the adults say, because my world is a different, worldview. But I will say, what does it mean to be respectful? And if you meet anyone on this trip, another kid, a grown-up, someone in charge who doesn't know about safety, who else could you talk to? Who do you, and it's often helpful to have, some chaperones that they know, like such and such as parent, if someone doesn't know something about safety, and to practice some of that. If the person in charge is making you feel unsafe, who else can you talk to? What does that look like? Just that they've practiced. And then the last thing is to ask the person in charge of the trip, what do you need? Do you need me to be praying for you this week as you're gearing up? Do you need someone to run and grab, lanyards that haven't bought yet? Like, to again see it as collaborative, and building safety nets around people to say, how can I be helpful? And so it's a balance of asking the questions, practicing and preparing with your kid, and then also making sure that our kids know that we don't want them to be the problem when it comes to safety either. What are our safety rules when we're at someone else's house? What are our safety rules when we're traveling with somebody else? You don't have the right to make people feel unsafe in their body. So if someone is starting to feel unsafe in their body around you, what are things that we could do? And so to practice, not just when it comes to like preventing them from being targeted with those kind of discussions, but also to do no harm. And kids who feel really comfortable and being able to speak up for themselves and advocate for themselves and know the people in their life who they can reach out to if they have help can be some of the people letting you know, hey, this thing's going on in this part of the camp that you might not know about. Don't, and to have that practice of, and if you tell someone, you won't get in trouble and I won't be mad at you. But some of that what if scenarios and practicing can also have those kids be some of your best champions in creating strong community. And it's hard to answer these questions in short form. So Mike, I feel for you before. It's like, and I could say 10 other things, but these are good things to be thinking about.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, for just sharing so much wisdom that can help us out as leaders, that can help us out as parents. Mike, as you've looked at these summer trips, what are some key areas of concern for safety that you see on these trips, and how can we impact safety?
Yeah, so I kind of referenced it a little bit before, but now I want to get a little more specific. But remember, kind of a very simple framework for thinking about prevention is by being proactive, as we're talking about our faith and God's heart on these issues, and our heart as leaders and parents about these issues, that is going to help deter some unsafe behaviors. But another major form of prevention is when we clarify a few key expectations. Well, within those expectations, we have freedom, and we don't have to be scared or paranoid all the time, because we know what's expected and what we're all agreed upon as these are the respectful boundaries, and these are the safe boundaries. So what we want to do with that clarity then is just give empowerment to speak up if those boundaries are being tested in some way. And by the way, that's what a lot of bad actors do, is they go up to those boundaries, they're trying to test them to see, is there an opportunity here to take something further? Is there a vulnerability here that I can take further? Is anyone noticing? Is anyone watching? Can I take it further? And that's with more vulnerable situations, that's with touch, that's with language, with isolation, basic things like that are often the things that are being tested. So specifically, what we can do is bring some clear expectations to those more vulnerable moments, those more vulnerable areas. So I mentioned them before, and I'll add a few, but with sleeping arrangements, in a lot of camp settings, there are bunks and everyone has their own, even if it's bunk beds, there's someone on the top bunk, there's someone on the bottom bunk. So everyone has their own bed. So a good expectation is, this is Jimmy's bunk, this is Tommy's bunk. At night, Jimmy and Tommy are not getting into each other's bunks. And certainly with adults, adults should not be in the bunks with a kid, period. Adults should have their own bunks, and each person, the best setup, when we can have that kind of, each one in their own bunk, that's a good setup. Now, in hotels, sometimes churches have to use hotels, and then you have to share beds sometimes. Again, you have to do the very best you can. I would say, unless it's immediate family, sometimes churches do have to put two kids in one bunk. We don't want an adult and a kid and a minor in a bed together. Again, unless it's like immediate family, I think that's a little different. But even in that setting, like with two students in a bed, we still want to say, look, the boundaries we have in our policy for expectations for touch, that is especially important in a time of sleeping. And so those boundaries of healthy and inappropriate touch versus appropriate touch, that especially applies, in that kind of setting. So we want to be very clear about that. I mentioned showering and changing. The best possible setup, in my opinion, is, and by the way, in 2024, I would look for camps where you can have this setup. We just want to be able to have complete privacy for an individual in showering and in changing. I just think that avoids so many problems, and that makes the setup easier. Certainly, if that's unavoidable completely, I mean, I am from the 80s and 90s and did gym class in the 80s and 90s. So I get that some setups don't allow for that complete privacy all the time. But what I would say is, certainly we have to make sure there's a very clear boundary, at the least, of significant power differentials within those types of environments, showering and changing. So the very best setup, in my opinion, is that there is an individual privacy in both showering and changing. If that's not possible, and it's peers, we want to make sure there's not significant age differences, but it's relative equal power in ages as much as possible. And certainly it would be something we must avoid, adults and kids showering, in close proximity or without privacy. That's something we need to avoid. For restrooms, again, single-use restrooms make it pretty easy. Then it should just be no one's in the restroom together, but most are not single use. And so again, just a very clear boundary. You should only be in the stall, one person in each stall. Phone should be put away. And I've seen it, actual cases where that's where the phones come out and someone takes a picture, starts recording, and now you have a big issue. just make it simple. And some churches, of course, say, we're going to take the phones away except for certain emergencies or certain situations anyway. But if phones are there should be just a very clear boundary, in my opinion. I think it's the safest approach. And it's a simple approach to just say, look, be very, just to be very clear, phones are never out in the restroom. And that just saves you a lot of problems. A few other key boundaries, of course, supervision, making sure that there's adequate supervision. And then we're aware of isolation. Of course, a lot of camps give you some kind of freedom within limits or within the camp to roam and free time in certain places. We just want to make sure that there is an understanding of what is expected. And certainly in a camp setting, you can still have plenty of mentoring and individual conversation without an unsafe situation like an adult taking a single student way far away from everyone else. We want to make sure those healthy boundaries we put in place in our church policy week by week, like no one adult, one child situations, at least two adults supervising activities. And in a camp with multiple kids, we'll have more than that, of course. We can still have one-on-one mentoring, conversation, talk about sensitive issues, but at a camp, usually there's some open spaces where that can be done, and there's still accountability and visibility for others. Communication is also a key boundary. Of course, there should be no sexual communication between adults and kids, older kids and younger kids. And of course, respectful words, no belittling, no threatening, things of that nature. I think those should always be a part of our policies on a week by week basis in church anyway. And we just extend that and bring that into a camp setting. Alison, what would you add to any of that?
I think that's comprehensive as a place to start. I think it's also having a staff training where we say what worked last time we did this and what didn't work last time we did this, because we learn from our mistakes. And then when we train the young people, the actual campers or participants, having them practice speaking up. I mean, it's not on them. The safety of this community shouldn't be solely on the shoulders of an 8-year-old, but just even practicing being given permission. I worked at a camp in college, and we brought our kids on a nature hike, and of course, one of my kids fell into the mud. That's just how the world works. And so, they got her out of the mud, and they said, "Why don't you take her up to go shower and then bring her back and meet us for whatever was the next thing?" And I'm like, 4 steps. Springer, and she looks up and she said, "Who's the other person?" So we always use rule of 3, like who's the other person coming with us?
Of course.
And it wasn't like you are dangerous and get away from you or whatever. She knew the rules, she knew the language. Like 4 steps, being like, "You are correct, child." And I, as an adult, should remember that. Let's find someone else to, hey, can you come with me? One of the other staff or whatever. I don't remember exactly who it was. Like, you come with me, and the 2 of us can hang out while she showers. And then we have the rule of 3 because everyone was in lower camp, but we're going to be the only 2 going up to upper camp. And so just when we're all on board, we all know the expectations, and when someone is pushing, as you were talking about, seeing how far they can get, that it's not that everybody is pushing back, and that we always learn when things don't go well. I've been at camps, there are things I wish I would have done differently. There have been things that, and sitting down before the next time we do it and say, what didn't work? Where were our gaps? Where were our issues when it came to changing to bathrooms, to schedules? Did we give kids enough sleep? I mean, that's one of the really, really big things, is that young people love to stay up late often, especially in things like this. And if we return them home with 3 hours or 4 hours of sleep a night, having made all these big life decisions about their faith, that kind of can feel a little cult-like, in the sense of like, we need to make sure the kids are eating and sleeping, their body needs are being taken care of, as we then are exploring issues, exploring faith life, exploring community. And so if maybe we have like a nap time, even if it's high schoolers, like they don't have to nap, flat on your bunk by yourself for an hour, where you can listen to music or you can write or you can draw, but to just intentionally with parents, let them know that rest will be happening. Because I see people make their most of their mistakes when they're exhausted, staff as well. And so making sleep a priority and figuring out what that looks like in a schedule is very, very important.
Yeah, I love that. And what you're saying there, it makes me think of what I'm often telling churches. So often they're reaching out to us and we have a meeting and I'm telling them, here's how I would approach it. But what I tell them is you all have to decide how you're going to do this as a team. And it really is about that culture. And, you know, these these issues of safety, again, are always going to be contextually solved together. And it's best that it's not just that one person, like you said, it's a team figuring it out together. And then we're reinforcing and helping each other live it out well together. And so much so that it really is a part of our culture. So I love your story about the kid saying, "Hey, who else is coming?" That's perfect.
Right? And I mean, it's like, I should know better. And yeah, and
Yeah,
I think when we call each other out on boundary violations like that, it's not,
yeah,
we're not vilifying people, but we're
right.
pointing it out for them to self-correct. And then we just
Yeah,
let someone know, hey, we're not supposed to have two kids in a hammock together at this certain age or whatever else. And whatever it might be. Like, so I asked the kids to separate just so you know I did that. Because if you
yeah,
file it away and be like, there was a boundary violation, it was small, but whatever, we
yeah,
don't tell the person in charge, they might have six people be like, well, I caught these two doing this thing, and I caught these. So who is your point person for those boundary violations?
yep,
Because it might just be one and done, and then
yeah,
it's not an issue. But it's when everyone's just filing things away, it's hard to see patterns. And then
yeah,
I went to a youth specialties conference very early in my youth ministry, and the thing that will always stick with me, and I use it in almost every training, is the person. I wish I could remember who's presenting. I can't give him full credit, but he talked about that a lot of churches try to do a light bulb model of ministry or a light bulb model of camping ministry. You find one person who's really high energy, who's really gregarious, who loves to lead the songs, loves to be around the kids. You plug that person in, and everybody else backs off, and then the kids flock to that person. And the
right.
danger with just having that one light bulb is if that light bulb burns out, goes on maternity leave, gets another call, does something that they're not supposed to do, and you lose that, you then lose
Yeah,
all of that energy, use all those kids who expect this person to be camp, or this person to represent the community. And
yeah,
it's even worse when kids feel like they have to go through that one person to get to God. Because then that person is gone. How do I get to God? And instead of building light bulb in our camp to light things up, is to build track lighting. Who's good at what? Some of our people who don't like to stand up in front of the group and lead things are our best at noticing this kiddo's really homesick. And so using people's gifts in different ways as we build sort of track lighting in our ministries, because you never want a relationship that somebody has with God to have to go through one person. And then that also creates like cult of personality and all of
mm,
those kinds of dangers. And the other hard thing with being the person leading the trips is you sometimes do have to be the bad guy in the sense of holding the if you're going into camping ministry because you want a lot of teenage friends, that's not going to be your outcome, because you're the one saying no, you can't have your phone in your cabin. You're the one who's saying, then I was telling the folks here when I brought kids on a ski trip up in northern Minnesota, and the radio was saying that this was back when we would listen to radios. We're driving more, but it was like the weather's really bad, roads are really bad, road conditions are horrible. Turn around and go back if you're coming from the metro. And so the vehicles that were going from our church, the ski trip, we all turn and come back, and the kids were livid. Like we've been fundraising for this trip for weeks, and this is
right.
our one chance to all hang out and do this on a ski hill. And why are you ruining for us and whatever? It's like, I want you guys to get close to Jesus. I don't want you to meet him, and I don't want to meet him today. So we're going to go back to the church and have a lock-in and do the activities we're going to do here without the skiing. I'm sorry, but your safety is more important than my need to be liked. And
Yeah,
I can't. And then but just that idea of you do sometimes have to be the your safety is the number one priority, and that means you might not like me, and I'm okay with that. And who are your people to pour into you, because you can't have the youth pouring into you for self-esteem and for whatever purposes if you're in charge of a trip, because you're going to be the one that is saying like, nope, remember the rule, nope, here we go. And so just that balance as well.
Good input, good wisdom. One of the things that comes up, and you've both referenced it a little bit, the possibility of there being some type of concerning behavior between students. Allison, what kind of things should we do when we're addressing concerning behavior between students?
I think it's important at the beginning of the week when you lay out expectations to be really clear. It depends on the age of the kids. If I'm doing a senior high retreat, I just say at the beginning of the weekend, there will be no sex. This is a sex-free zone. And when I say sex, I mean anything on a spectrum of sexual activity, anything that could be romantic in nature. Your job this weekend is to work on yourself and be closer to God. And if you are in any type of relationship, put that on hold for the weekend, because healthy relationships, you need to be pouring into that other person. And I really want you to be focusing on your own faith life. And then talking about what if people do push that boundary, what will happen? You know, this is the reason why no sex is so important to me in a senior high retreat. Is these are things that close down retreats. These are things that close down camps. This really can be hurtful for people, or it can make them connect that experience to this faith experience, and then that can get all confusing if that. Anyway, so just to be really clear with why, and young people are more likely to follow rules when they understand the why. And so you would ebb and you would change those expectations a little bit depending on the age that you're dealing with, the community that you're dealing with. But to be really clear, these are our rules and here's the why. And does anyone have any questions? And if you are seeing something that worries you, who can you tell? And there's a difference between telling and tattling. Tattling is when we say something because we want to get someone in trouble. That's never fun. That never goes well. Telling is when we're worried about our community or we're worried about our person and we want someone to help them. And so that idea about telling and tattling, and to empower bystanders to let you know something's going on. I used to earlier on really try to put the kids in charge. If I was seeing kids being isolated or not connecting socially, whatever, I would say, okay, you know, you two seniors who've been going to these for a long time, this first year student isn't making connections. Can you sit with him at lunch? And I will never forget, I was telling two girls, I said, you know, this guy is just not connecting to, can you sit with him at lunch and get him better, you know, and the two girls looked at me and said, well, he keeps asking us for nude photos of ourselves. Like every time, like he, you know, every time that we have a minute, he's like, you send me a nude photo. And like, he's in ninth grade, we're seniors, we're just trying to get away from him because he's creeping us out. And I was like, oh, so it's maybe not up to the kids to be the ones to deal with the social stuff, because maybe there's a reason why people are creating space. Maybe that's an adult checking in and being like, you're doing okay. And so just giving kids the tools that they can go from being bystanders to upstanders, but not putting the safety on the community solely on their shoulders or making them feel like they need to put themselves in an unsafe place to make someone else feel better. So just letting them know their safety is the paramount. And kids have a really good detector as to if you mean it or not. Like kids don't care how many letters are after my name. They want to know, do you like me and do you care about me? And the more that we can reflect in the choices we make as leaders, that safety is number one, and that this community is important, and that kids are important, the more they trust you with concerns that might come up for community health. Like, I'm really worried these two people are supposed to be in their own bunks, but they're changing all the time. They always go to change and spend time together in the same space. I'm worried. Anyway, whatever it might be, the more that they trust that you're doing what's good for the community, and they've seen that play out, the more likely they are to tell you when they have a concern.
Yeah, that makes good sense. That makes good sense. Well, thank you for sharing that wisdom. Mike, do you want to maybe take 5 minutes and then we'll get to questions and answers after that? We've got one question so far. Again, as a reminder, please, if you have any questions that you'd like Mike or Allison to answer, if you could put them in the Q&A, that would be great. Mike, what are some specific recommendations for key areas of policy that maybe we haven't talked about yet that we should keep in mind?
Sure. So one thing that's important to say is, you know, you're going to learn what the problems are if you don't already know the high risk things. You'll always learn as you do camps and go on trips. You'll learn certain things, right, that you couldn't anticipate. And you figure it out. Oh, this area is a problem area. We need to address it more directly. So just be open to that. Do the very best you can, but be ready to learn and know that you can't fully prepare for every safety issue or challenge ahead of time. You do your best. You know, of course, things we've already mentioned, but you know, especially like in a hotel setting, it's a little bit different, obviously, with, you know, with everyone, all the boys or all the guys sleeping together and so forth, or all the girls sleeping together. You obviously, it's a little harder to sneak out in a setting like that, but you of course want a time like, hey, after this hour, we're all here, because that gets to safety in regards to sneaking away, to be more isolated. That's when a lot of boundary crossing, unsafe behavior, and even abuse happens. So with a hotel, that can be more challenging to know, are people there, and you can do a check, but then, it might not be as easy to tell. So you do have to just get creative, and that might be, it might be things like just setting a very clear boundary for the students. Like, hey, if you are leaving, then you will be sent home, or you will have some other consequence. Certainly if you're in a hotel, it might be something you check in with the security staff at the hotel. They might be able to, because hotels usually are invested in the security of their guests on some level. That might be something to do. But the key is to, again, bring the things that you're already working on through the year in terms of prevention into the time. And this is who we are, this is our culture, these are things we take seriously. Alison mentioned this a moment ago, but it's just being very specific. Who do you talk to if there is a boundary being crossed or an unsafe situation? Many teenagers and kids, even younger kids, will feel more safe talking to a peer sometimes first, and just making the kids aware that, look, if a friend comes to you with something, often you're going to be able to support them and have enough encouragement and support to then go talk to a leader, a chaperone, or talk to a parent. And maybe a parent can then talk to the leader on the trip. So you want just a very clear examples of who they talk to if there is a problem, if there's a concern, like the example Alison just gave. If they are, if someone's asking them for nude photos, they need to know, hey, that's completely out of bounds. You need to go talk to an adult, because that person is not being safe. And even if it's another student, you need to go talk to an adult about that. Other policy things that really matter, of course, is having a very clear reporting policy. Churches need that in place. Again, we need to follow that when we're on a trip. A couple details on that might matter. If the disclosure happens on the camp, which certainly does happen, it might be about something that happened back home. So you always report abuse against a minor, in the locale. And some states have a statewide hotline number for CPS. Some others have a countywide system for CPS. And we would encourage a report to both Child Protective Services and law enforcement. And the law enforcement is going to be a local call. The CPS, the Child Protective Services call, is either going to be a statewide hotline number or a county number. That information is easy to Google and find, but church policy should have that. Now, if it's at the camp, and the camp, let's say, is in another state, if that's where the abuse is alleged to have occurred, you do report in that locale to both Child Protective Services and law enforcement. So those are good policies that church leaders need to have in place. And again, it just brings it back to policy effectiveness. It starts with leaders and building that culture. And that can't be something we just initiate for the trip and think it's going to work really well. It kind of has to be our mentality and mindset all year round. And then we're bringing that mentality with us and applying it in some very specific ways and some higher risk settings like a camp environment.
All right. Great. Great. Well, thank you for those who've put questions in the Q&A. We have just a couple, and we'll try and get to some answers. One question came in, and I'd really be interested in hearing what both of you have to say about this. How can you improve parent buy-in? a concern that a lot of times parents aren't really bought into this whole process, aren't really um, invested in what can be done. How do you improve that parent buy-in?
Mm.
Some of that is the high schooler pushing away from their parent and saying, like, I just need my space. Please don't be the parent who's there. And so they're trying to adjust to those norms. One thing that's been helpful, which could sound whatever, but when it comes to like a Wednesday night activity or whatever, I've had the parents of the younger kids helping with the high schoolers and the parents of the high schoolers helping with the younger kids, because then I still have parent buy-in. I still have that community of other people engaged, but they get a break from their parents. And some of the parents of teenagers like working with your kids, and parents of the younger ones like seeing what's going to happen. You know, so thinking about that creatively. Another thing that's been helpful is doing like the first 15 minutes, like, hey, tonight we're going to be doing this, 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 but the first 15 minutes we need parents to stay for these 5 important tips or these 5 things that every parent needs to know. And so it's not the entire meeting, but there's that expectation of this happening. And one of the things that I would say is I would have a requirement to have had a family meeting with the family before I take their kids anywhere for my own, like, hey, what are their, I want to know what their medications when no one else, like when there aren't other kids around, being like, I want to know, and having a young person be involved in that. Like, what do you do when you get stressed out? If the child has anxiety disorder, if the child has anything that might make me want to be planning ahead. We think about trans youth, and when it comes to sleeping in bathrooms, things like that, we think about whatever the thing that they're bringing to the table. I want to make sure that they feel safe in that setting. So having a meeting with parents and kids, Zoom or over the phone or in person, 15 minutes. I mean, it doesn't have to be a long thing, but just how can I best serve you? Anything that I should know, being really helpful if I'm going to be taking their young person away from them for a bit. And just, I think the more that we can communicate and give opportunities for, a short communication back, great. But yeah, I find that a lot of that isn't necessarily the parent, it's the peer pressure of the other parents who are giving their kids space. They don't want to be perceived as the parent who's there. So creating opportunities that are, this is the norm, that the first 15 minutes we're going to meet together because we have to do these 3 things, or this 1 month we're doing internet safety and we're having a speaker come and it's going to be for parents and kids together. And that's the expectation. So creating those expectations, so it's not just the one parent sitting there being like, should I be here or not? So that's one piece of that. And I say any parent who's had safe church training or safeguarding training, they understand why we need adults involved who are healthy and involved in the lives of their kid. And we sometimes get more buy-in once they've gone to a training like that.
Yeah, and I would add to that, with that point specifically, Allison, to get parents to get to a training so they are understanding the role that any of us can play in contributing to safety and us being a place of safety, a place of respect. The way I coach church leaders all the time to talk about that and engage parents or really anyone is to frame these issues positively and to connect them to our Christian faith. To say something like, God cares about each person. God cares that our church, our trip, anything is it is a place where there is safety and there is respect. That's how we love our neighbor as ourself. All of us contribute to that. And we as your leaders care very deeply that this is a place of safety and respect. We care about each person. To talk on that level, positively connecting it to our faith, that will help some parents realize, oh, okay, this does matter. I do need to engage, and I can help contribute to safety in some very positive ways. So,
All right, very good, very good. We also had another question come in related to, do you have any recommendations for handling guidelines around TV usage in hotel rooms? If that summer trip does involve students staying in hotel rooms, especially if there isn't adult supervision, or even if there is, what adults should be watching with kids?
You want to take that one to start, Mike?
sure. So, I mean, when you have that setting, there is that issue. Most hotel rooms, of course, if not, in this day and age, are going to have, a TV. sometimes they also have ways to stream content or get other things, not just that are airing on live TV. So it's good to know, again, plan ahead. It's good to ask the hotel, hey, what's on your TVs? What capabilities do they have? And then, with that information, just to set, and that's a community, that's where you can engage, whether it's your leaders and you decide where the boundary is. You might ask the kids, like Alison suggested, to speak into some of those boundaries. Hey, where are we going to set the boundary? And so it just might be, hey, certainly nothing sexually explicit is content we're going to be viewing. Nothing that has explicit violence is going to be something that we're viewing. That's just not going to contribute to our spiritual goals for this trip. Things like that. So again, it's really a contextual question to me, but how we approach it is we set a very clear boundary. And again, we focus on the positive reinforcement of, hey, why this matters, and that all of us contribute to respecting that boundary that we've all agreed upon.
And I would have discussions of the community norms of when does it go off. There are some kids who really can't sleep when there's noise going on. We think about community building. If there's some people want to watch a late night movie and there's two people want to sleep and they're in the same room, like the sleepers need to sleep. So you're gonna mute it and
Very
do
good.
closed captioning, but talking through those options, and in small groups, you're the 4 people who are gonna be in this room. What does that look like? If there's any movie that you're showing as a group, like as projector style, whatever else it is, no matter what it is rated, watch it all the way through first before you watch it to young people. Because there are things that I'll be like, oh yeah, I've heard good things about that and whatever. There's a scene that I'm like, oh, this is all kinds of awkward, and now I have to unpack it, and it's so even if it's something that's rated, whatever, I would always suggest just watching something all the way through, because and the other thing is we often get pulled away during movies, like, can you sign this form? Can you call this person? Can you do this thing? And I just want to have the context of what they all saw if it was a group meet, even if I can't watch it, so that if questions come up or whatever else. So I would work on your community norms beforehand, especially within small groups of rooms. And as you said, nothing violent, nothing sexual, and to have sleep be the priority. We're not framed around, we're trying to keep you away from all things pop culture. It's framed around, we have a lot of work to do this week, my friends, and we need sleep. And so sleep is the number one paramount, because we're gonna be doing this. And I want you, when we're playing ultimate frisbee tomorrow, to have energy to run on the field. So get sleep. So to frame it around what is the why, right? And young people are more likely to buy into rules when it's framed around safety. And when this is because of safety and here's why, and to have it make sense. Like, yeah, I do want to do well during flag frisbee tomorrow, and if I'm exhausted, I won't. That makes sense. I'm gonna sleep and I'm not gonna watch whatever the thing is that I'm tempted to watch. So when we can frame it with the why and explain the why and do it around safety, that's best. And when I think about faith, it's like we don't want to put things into our eyes and hearts and brains this week to have that be the theme of your time. Like, this is what the theme is. The theme is discipleship, or what it means to love your neighbor, whatever your theme is. Like that doesn't go along with this. So if you can find something to watch that goes along with this, great. But everyone does need sleep as a big paramount. And
Cool.
swinging and knocking and opening, having them open door and having adult chaperones be in charge of doing a physical check before bed, especially when it's hotel rooms, is super important.
It's good to practice. Yeah.
All right. Well, Mike and Allison, thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing all this wisdom as we look ahead to the summer trip season. We really hope that this equipped both leaders and parents as they're looking forward to those summer trips. Please know that the program will be posted on our YouTube channel, so you certainly will have the opportunity to watch it again for reference or for any parts that you may have missed. Once again, thank you, Mike and Allison, and we will see you in June for our next Grace Live conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks for all you do for youth and for kids. It's so appreciated.
Thanks, Pete.
Yep. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
I can make it through the night when I'm clinging to your light. You will make